Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Let me start by making you a promise. My promise is that no bears will be harmed during this talk. I want to start with the question for you, Maja. We've been talking a lot during this conference about agentic AI. But I think what we want to talk about today is something different, which is actually the agency of us as humans, right? How do we as human beings think about our own agency in a time of such technological change and such change in the natural world? And maybe you could start by giving us some broader context.
Sure. Now, this is exactly where I think it always makes a lot of sense before you start talking about movement or a change you want to make is to understand the situation. So exactly as you said, the context. And obviously we're in the nature track here. And when you think about why a track is called nature, we've seen the absence of nature in all of the talks that are not explicitly allocated into this rubric, which I found the most astonishing thing. Because right now, before we were talking about risks, we were talking about security, and we were talking about what to actually put as a priority to safeguard when we're now having to prioritize and allocate resources to that. We're all, I think we all notice, a lot of people are having lunch now because we are biological beings. We do like being fed, we do like having clean water to drink, and we do like having clean air to breathe. We also like having a roof over our heads. And we do know that all this is threatened, and we do understand that geopolitical shifts that we're seeing, to put that first thing out as a driver where we are completely closely related to resources in the ground. We've seen that in the ways that wars have been waged, but also obviously in the capacity to build rather than to react. We've had an idea about security that was much more on reacting, but we're not really talking about how to prevent future crises that are not necessarily only human-driven, but happening and then sucking up lots of resources like California will be having now, or Germany has had 40 billion spending on rebuilding something that was destroyed by nature because we're not dealing with it well. And this is where I think we have to align, and I push it over back to you, this notion of where are we now in this planetary journey, and where are the tipping points there, and what is driving political choices, talking about Greenland. Why does someone want to claim a totally democratic country that's not part of theirs, unless there is something interesting under the soil in that matter? And then to think about how do we understand those developments in combination with what technology is being used for, and how do we, at best, combine the two, the understanding of what's changing here, to get to a more secure outcome that could take away a lot of the fear, a lot of the necessity to battle, whilst putting technology in the service of that. That would be at least my kind of idea of how can we actually shape a movement that would combine the two tracks that we have in one place that don't necessarily always think stuff together.
So one of the things I've been struck in your work is this, you asked this brilliant question, which was, everyone wants a peaceful, just world. Given that, why don't we have one? Right? Everyone around the world wants that. Why don't we have it? And I think as we think about this conference in particular and this idea of future positive, right, this optimistic future, I think there are kind of three big themes I think about when we think about what are the realities of those looking to build movements towards a better world, right? If you're trying to make change in the world, what are the realities, particularly of the communication landscape, which we should all be thinking about? And in my mind, there are three things which have changed. The first is that we now need to value intensity more than favorability. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean, for generations, we thought a lot about favorability. You wanted to buy a product because you liked it a lot. Politicians would measure how much they were liked. The favorables of Hillary Clinton were always higher than Donald Trump's. But actually what's happened now is we've shifted the metric from favorability to intensity. And if you want to make change in the world right now, what you have to be able to do is create intensity, not favorability. There are too many good causes that have good arguments, but not intense arguments. They're not generating the kind of heat around what they're doing. This isn't necessarily a good thing for the world, just to be clear, but I do think it's fundamental in how you think about making change. Second big shift, and again, not a good thing, but a reality, is that we've reached a point now where the feelings have got much stronger than facts. So particularly those people in the environmental world who are thinking very carefully about fact-based arguments and measurements and empiricism and evaluation, and of course they are right. The problem is fact-based arguments aren't breaking through in a world that feelings-based arguments are winning. We just saw that with the US presidential campaign. Biden was saying over and over again, the economy's fixed, inflation's in the right direction, unemployment's low, I've got the facts on my side, but he didn't have the feelings on his side. Donald Trump did. And then the third big shift, I think, for movement building is about leadership. And actually, we're leaving behind, I hope, a period that we always thought about these superstar leaders. We had these single individuals, often white men, who took up all the space and said, I am the movement, I am the way to follow, I am the direction of the future. We need not superstars, but superconductors. We need those individuals who are actually able of galvanizing the agency of others and not making it about them.
I would like to ask you one question about this, the connection between 1 and 2. Because when you think about how did it happen that the heat was turned off for climate change, for example, which is the most threatening development next to biodiversity loss for everyone. So who managed to turn down the heat, and how is that connected with turning off truth?
So I think one of the big dangers for everyone right now is distraction. Right? If you think about the quality of distraction in our lives now, it's very, very high. Even some of you during this session will be called to your pocket where your phone is to check on something. It's very unlikely for any of us that's actually going to be important. Very unlikely. It might be for one, might be for two, but very unlikely. But the algorithms have got so good at directing our attention and distracting us that actually some of the most important issues of the day are being neglected, not because people don't care, but because the click in the corner just gets us all eventually. And what's so interesting, particularly about algorithmic addictions, is unlike alcohol, which is as addictive as it was 20 years ago, that's not true of some of these platforms. So the thing I think about a lot of the intensity is algorithmic, right? We've all now been trained. We as individuals have been trained for a decade to respond to these cues. And because of that, we're being distracted for some of these much bigger issues.
And if we then bring that to leadership, because what would we require for this more stewarding leadership and collaborative would be the belief that you are actually having the intention to co-lead on the other side that you're approaching, and the belief that in conjunction, so together, we can solve the problems, and we're looking for everybody to have a space in the solution. That would be the kind of trust and democratic rule that has a common good orientation, if we summarize it for some of the ideals and values that we talked about and what some of the panels to defend. So right now, when we think about the truth being pushed aside, we have ability of the most powerful, so that speak against that leadership driving through, and we have to protect that. They can just say whatever they want because they can turn up the loudspeaker, and then that is the thing that people orientate themselves by because they feel lost. They either follow their influences or they follow people that are really loud and are claiming, I'm going to be the winner. I found that a very interesting distinction between the type of people that are leading. Are they the ones that are looking for the whole outcome, or are they the ones that only want to sit on top? And now what happens is that we have the I want to win sit in governments that were set to be looking for everyone, like we have the union now between Musk and Trump. So how do we get the belief back that we are in collaboration able to solve the problems for everybody to have a space? Because then we'll turn away from following the most strong to feel I want to be part of the winning team and forget that there are many others that won't.
I often wonder whether we often confuse people who are leading with people who are being noticed. Yeah. Not really the same thing, right? People who are being noticed, particularly on social media, are actually not leading at all. They're just finding ways to be noticed. But some of the most important activists I've ever known are names no one's ever heard of, right? If you think about the work, particularly in your space, you think about nature, there are some superstars, but there aren't very many. Actually, what there is there's thousands, in fact, hundreds of thousands, in fact, millions of people around the world who are part of a leadership collaboration. And the one thing which I've been struck about your work, which I think is the place to start here, is how do we think about a broader narrative? And how do we think about systems thinking? Because the danger in our space is the sole individual with their own solution to the problem, with their own individual personal story, which shows how they turned a corner, and because of their insight, they'll solve the problem. That will never work. We know that now, although we keep rewarding it. So I guess that I'd be interested to hear from you, like how you think about that kind of reset, that broader narrative landscape. How do we set a new narrative so that the movements of the future are more effective than some of the past?
No, I do find that there is a typical reaction to crises. We have two options. Either we make everything smaller, like what do I care for, the realm of caring, and I put the I very much big, and we forget a bit about the we. And the other one would be the kind of leadership you talk about, where we're widening, step back, understand what are the system dynamics here, and who do we need to have in place that are all influential on shifting those system dynamics, to have them collaborate, to make the crisis go away, in a way that the fear of falling behind, unless I fight hardest, can be mitigated. And this is exactly where the stewardship would come in. And this is why I do think it is super important to be very clear that right now the checking out mode, where everybody feels I can do this because I've got a lot of money, I'm not going to pay taxes, I'm going to go to some funky island and buy it at best, so I'm going to just see the rest go down from somewhere nice, is not a good message for any democracy. So elites that are finding it very interesting to say, oh, this is, in Germany we have that, oh, this is so screwed up now, nothing's interesting here anymore. We're sitting on our packed bags. That's not a good message to bring into a society that's very worried that everybody would check out that can. But it holds true on the other side as well, where people, because we have strong protection in employment, would say, I'm going to go retire at 60 because I can. I know we have a complete shortage of workforce, but I don't want to participate in this anymore. And so we have a dual push from everybody that can to rather check out rather than engage and get in and say, I see you, I see the issue, and I see my possible contribution. So this will be a cultural shift more than anything else. And I wonder who's that subject right now that can bring this together, because we had it last, I think, on the For Future movement, at least in Germany, it was really strong because it had this joint thing. We will make climate change something that we can handle. And it wasn't only the young people in the streets, but it was from all different backgrounds. The Scientists for Future were telling everybody, how do things hang together? What are the best solutions? What can you do? Then we had entrepreneurs for future, psychologists for future, educators for future. So it was the notion that in every sector you had a shift in viewing the world and in saying, I'm willing to change my way of doing things and collaborate differently to get us jointly solve the problem. And that was, for me, the most impactful stewardship, leadership that we've had. So where do we get this now? And what could be the big asks that we can ally around? I think that's exactly the question out.
So in that context, if you think about the challenge for all of us is then this broader narrative piece. What is the broader narrative which brings everybody together? What is the galvanizing concept that creates that broader coalition you're talking about? But then under that, I think there are two pieces. One of them is new. So the first one was true already, which is participation. So if you think about movement building, it is participation, right? How do you mobilize? How do you galvanize participation of people around a cause? But the other thing which is now kicking in is going to be mobilization of AI. So there's going to be this interesting duality now in terms of, I think, movement building around the participation of human beings and the mobilization of agentic AI. And I think one of the things that those people who are thinking about movements and thinking about social change right now, often of the three things I've just mentioned, they don't have any of them, right? There's not a grander narrative that brings everything together. There's not actually a mobilization strategy around people, right? People talk about movements a lot. People like talking about movements a lot, but it's only a movement if it moves without you. Right? What usually when people talk about movements, what they really mean is they've got a press campaign about an issue they care about. There are not people on their own terms mobilizing around that issue as they did in the situation you talked about. And then the last piece of this is then that AI piece, which I think is new territory for all of us. But I think we think AI activism is going to be a very interesting frontier, right? Which is actually how AIs themselves are shifting the activist debate in two ways. One is going to be acute, which is they will be in the debate as stakeholders and having voices and shifting influences. And one will be hidden, which is how is the AI as hidden activists shaping all of our minds in a new direction. And I think as we think about particularly the road ahead, the challenge ahead for people who I think are feeling pretty bruised, right? That checkout feeling is very real for people who feel like I've kind of given up for a while. I don't see a route forward. As we look for a route forward for people, I do think that framework is the right way to approach the problem.
Well, when we then, just as a final push, I'm closest to Europe, and we're now really thinking, what could Europe do, right, in face of what's happening in the United States, which was the closest partner in many respects. I would think there is a total potential to say we are going to widen the security concept, to say what is the kind of narrative that we need, because we do understand that having renewable energies will be providing for independence from rogue states. Going circular will be providing for more security to have what you need to have an industry running within your own territories, will provide, as the third point, the outputs in terms of technological development and solutions, etc., that are then potentially being exported to the world to lower the conflict over resources. So you're also having contribution like we've had with the development of renewable energies that will be allowing to mitigate in other places. So this could be the thing where you're aligning with, in a new way, the competitiveness, which we are so concerned about, the security feeling, also in a preventive way, and still a contribution to the world, because then we're not saying we're going to put up the frontiers here and we're only going to look for after self, but we're still going to provide for something that can also alleviate elsewhere.
Okay, well said. Very well. And I think as we think about a movement around AI, one of the things I think which I've been struck by when I've been here is one of the dangers right now in the AI debate is that the only voices we are hearing from are the people creating the technology or investing in the technology. And actually the people who are going to be impacted by the technology are being left by the wayside. And actually I think about a broader framing for AI. There's a really interesting question around a movement around a more ethical AI, a more just AI, where we think about what are the voices of the doctors or the nurses or the lawyers or the engineers. The list goes on and on and on and on. I mean, I've been writing about technology and power for 15 years, and I wrote a piece recently about AI, and a number of people said to me, you don't have the standing to write this. I've been working in the social change technology space. Why don't I have the standing? Because I'm not an AI person. And actually what's been very interesting is how a very narrow group of people with quite a narrow set of interests have dominated a debate that I think all of us need to encourage to be much wider. So as you say, when we're here talking about the intersection of nature and AI, that shouldn't be a peripheral topic. That's the central topic.
Totally, yeah. No, and just as an invitation, I think, for everyone, because we're so intimidated by some of the powerful stories, and I've been quite struck by some of the tech determinism we've heard here. There will be humanoids everywhere, and AI, unless you put it everywhere, you're going to fall behind. Putting it everywhere means, in the context of AI in our infrastructures, it's becoming irreversible. It's very much in the interest of people that are pushing the AI to be able to control it. And I think Starlink is just a prime example where we want to be really cautious about linking then AI and control of information with infrastructure control, critical infrastructure control in the hands of a private person, linked into Italian government's security services soon is one of those examples. And the other one is really challenge why we're throwing so much money at replacing what's already there. Why do we throw a lot of money and are completely excited about creating humanoid robots? And I now heard about them being social companions might be the most important thing, not only replacing labor. It's like, why are we incapable of dealing with ourselves? It doesn't cost the planet. You can sit down, you can meditate, you can talk to someone, lift your eyes off the screen, engage with them, and find care, compassion, and the ability to cooperate without a stupid machine in the middle.
Yeah, right. There is no better closing note than that, other than to recommend your book, which is the perfect slogan for the finish, we can do better.